Nothing ever just happens without a reason. God does not, in his infinite knowledge and wisdom, leave things up to chance. Instead, he is constantly at work, using his creation and his people to press forward his will and his kingdom. God will do wonders. He will perform miracles and make his promises known. And we will see how awesome is the work of God. For the church to make a difference in this community, we have to be the difference in this community. If we as his people want to see a miracle, we have to be a miracle.
Well, good morning, Stonehill. It's great to see everybody here today. You guys were on fire. I heard you singing. Great job. I was back there and you guys were singing out. Love it. And we want to welcome you here, whether you're watching online, if you're listening to the podcast, or you're here live. We're so grateful that you're here because we are starting our new series called The Promises. And it's called The Promises Initiative, and we are looking forward to the next 4 weeks as I believe that God is going to do something amazing for us and with us. And I think that we'll look back someday at this 4 weeks and say, man, that was amazing what God did. So I'm excited about it. I hope you are. As you came in this morning, you might have saw a little kind of wristband on your chair. And this is what it is. We're calling this a prayer band. Okay, it has the promises on it. It has Stonehill Church. On the inside, it has our theme verse for the series, Exodus 34:10. And so this is what we're going to ask you to do. Okay, we're going to ask you to take it, even right now, put it on. Okay, we try to take some manly colors, but also very feminine colors at the same time, and put them together so that everybody would wear it. And what we want you to do is wear it for the next 4 weeks. And every time you look at it, we want it to be a reminder for you to pray for not only your own individual promises that God has for you, but also pray for the promises that God has for us as a church, and then also what we will do as we promise back to God and to live for him. And so would you guys do that? Would you wear that for the next 4 weeks with us and just all be unified together? And I think it's going to be an amazing, amazing time as we go through this. All right, let me tell you a story to start off with. My wife and I, Heather, we were married, we dated 3 years before we were married, okay? And I'll just be honest with you, from the very beginning, that woman could not keep her hands off of me, okay? Just gonna be real, all right? Just gonna be real. But actually, from the very beginning of our dating relationship, we committed that we were going to save ourselves from, you know what I'm talking about, until we were married, okay? We felt like God was asking us to do that through his word, and that's really what it's designed for. And so we just felt like that was a promise, and that was a commitment that we made to one another. Now, the summer before we got married, though, we upped it a little bit. Now, we only did this because we thought it was romantic, or it was just something really cool. It wasn't necessarily biblical, but we decided to not even kiss each other for 3 months before we got married. I don't know, we just thought it was gonna be magical or something. And so the first 2 months were pretty easy because I lived in Missouri and she lived in Oregon, all right? So that helped us out a little bit. But the week before we got married, I flew to Oregon, actually flew to Boise, and I was there to help out with the wedding. So I remember getting off the plane, and as I walked in, this is the time where you could actually go to the gate still. And I remember getting out into the hallway, and I remember seeing Heather, and it was like a scene from a movie, okay? And we're embracing one another as we come together, and we hugged each other, and it was an amazing, amazing time. And guess what? No smoochie. I mean, we were strong. We held strong. And so we got in the car, and we drove all the way from Boise to Baker City, Oregon, where she was from. And we pull up into the driveway, and as soon as we pull up into the driveway of her parents' house, she unbuckles her seatbelt and just lays a big old fat kiss on these lips, okay? And I'm thinking, woman, I am not a piece of meat, okay? That was what was going through my head, and she had broken her promise. Now, that's the way I tell the story. Her story might be a little different. But promises are a big deal, aren't they? They can build relationships. They can build confidence in relationships if they're kept. On the other hand, when promises are broken, they can tear apart relationships and confidence in one's relationship. And that's what we're going to be talking about today is relationships. Maybe you've experienced a promise before that has been broken and it's just ripped you apart. Could have been in your marriage where your spouse told you that they were going to be faithful, promised you, that didn't work out. Maybe it was at your job and your boss promised you a promotion or promised you a raise, but it didn't come to fruition. Or maybe it was a friend that you had a close relationship with and you promised to always be there for one another, but then you found out later on that friend was talking behind your back. And that's difficult. What we're going to be looking at the next 4 weeks are promises found in God's Word. Actually, 8,810 approximate promises that we find. But here's the great thing about God, is He never goes back on His promises. He's faithful and He's true. So we're going to be looking at that. And in one verse particularly, I already talked about this, found in Exodus chapter 34, verse 10, which is on the back of our bracelet. That is going to be our theme verse, and everything we talk about, everything we say, everything we dream about will be filtered through this promise of God. And this is God talking to Moses. He says, I am making a covenant with you, Moses. Before all of your people, I will do wonders never done in any nation in all the world. God says, I'm going to do something amazing where everyone will see me, will see my glory. And here's the promise. The people you live among will see how awesome is the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. That's God's promise. And just as His promise was then, I believe His promise rings true today, that He will do something amazing by using us so that everyone will see His glory, and everyone around us in our community and our neighborhoods will know who Jesus Christ is. But the question is, will we be part of it? Will we be part of it? So if you would turn to Exodus chapter 3, and actually this is the promise we're going to look at today, Exodus chapter 3, and we're going to talk about Moses, and we're not going to get to the promise quite yet, but it's going to be embedded into the message. We'll get to it towards the end. But what do we learn from Moses? And so we're going to take these next kind of 9 verses here, and we're going to unpack them, and there's 3 main thoughts, 3 main things that I feel like we need to learn from Moses. And if you're taking notes this morning, here's the first thought that we need to learn is this. When God gets your attention, pay attention. When God gets your attention, pay attention. And here we find Moses. He's in the wilderness. He is being a shepherd. He is watching sheep, much different from where he grew up in the palace in Egypt. But he kind of did something that was bad. He murdered someone, and so he began to run away. And here he's living in the consequences of his sin in the wilderness. And this is where we pick up here in Exodus chapter 3, and we see a conversation between him and God, a God who is graceful and loving. Verse 2 of Exodus chapter 3. There, the angel of the Lord appeared to him, Moses, in flames of fire from within a bush. I want you to picture that. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. It's crazy. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called him to him from within the bush. And he said, Moses, Moses. And Moses is like, here I am. I want you to picture this. Moses is out doing his thing. He's watching his sheep. He's probably listening to Spotify as he watches his Instagram and his Facebook posts because he has LTE service out there, right? And he's just walking along, and all of a sudden, this bush is on fire. Now, what was interesting about this bush being on fire is it was not burning. It was not disintegrating, and nothing around it was on fire. Just this bush, this ordinary bush. I always pictured when I heard this story growing up of this like 30-foot bonfire, like this massive fire, and that everyone from miles and miles around could see it, and there's no way that Moses would ever miss this sign from God. It was so massive. But that's not what the story says. It says that it was just a bush, just a little ordinary bush. And here's what I want you to get. God uses something here ordinary to get the attention of Moses. Something that wasn't very big. He didn't use a bonfire. He didn't use sirens. He didn't even use his audible voice at first. Just a simple, ordinary bush. Now, when I want to know something from God and I want God to tell me which direction to go, I just want something big. You know what I'm saying? Like, I just want God to let me know and make it really obvious. Like, God, am I supposed to move? God, am I supposed to marry this person? Am I supposed to date this person? God, am I supposed to take this new job? God, am I supposed to take this procedure done to me? God, am I supposed to have this difficult conversation with a family member or a friend? I just want God to come up to me and just go, and slap me in the face and say, Doug, this is what you're supposed to do. Anybody feeling me? Does anybody just want that? Okay, all right, so we're tracking together. Sometimes I just want that big inflatable green dude that dances at the car dealership. You know what I'm saying about? That just like dances like this all the time. And I just want to drive by him and him just point in the direction that I'm supposed to go. He looks happy. He's limber. And by the way, I've seen some of you dance before at weddings, and that's how you look too, okay? I just want God just to be very clear and just show me. Make it very evident that this is what I'm supposed to do. But is it possible that in effort for us to be looking for the bonfires, that we just walk past the bushes? Is it possible that God is having all these obvious signs all over for us, and we're looking for something big and we're just missing the bush? Maybe it's something simple in your own life. It's a relationship at your office where your coworker is coming to you, asking you for help, and you don't even think anything of it. You don't even think that God wants to use you right then to be his vessel. Maybe it's a friend that you haven't talked to forever, and all of a sudden they pop up in your life, and you just think it's random, but really it's a bush from God. So no, I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now. I think if we're not careful, we can take for granted all that God is doing here at Stonehill. People's lives are being changed. People are coming to Jesus. People are being baptized and discipled. And we can look at it and say, oh, that's just how it is. And yet God is saying, no, you guys don't get this. This is a big deal. I've called you for this time. There are people that live in this area, in this community, that need Jesus. And that is why you are here. I want to take a poll real quick. How many of you, one of the reasons, maybe not all of them, but maybe one of the reasons, whether it's big or small, one of the reasons why you are here is because this church is kind of close to your community. Can I just see your hands? Let's just, come on. Yeah, look at all these people, all right? Now, some of you live further away, and you just, because you love God, you come to this church, right? Because you just want to be blessed, and so that's awesome. But a lot of us, we come because this is where our church is. This is where our community is. And I'm going to tell you, we are just scratching the surface. There are so many people that live around here that still don't know the message and the hope of Jesus Christ. And God is saying, Stonehill, this is why I wanted you to start Stonehill, so that you can continue to shine the love of Jesus to everyone in this community. We cannot ignore this bush that God has placed in front of us as a church. And when God gets our attention, church, let's pay attention. Here's a second thought, if you're taking notes, that we can learn from Moses is this. God has been faithful in the past. He's perfect in the present. And we can trust him in the future. As we look back, we can see God has been faithful in the past, whether it's through the word of God. He's been faithful in our own lives. And because of that, we can have confidence and what he has said and what he has done to take the next steps of faith. This past Thursday morning, it's 4 a.m. in the morning, and we're asleep. Our entire family's asleep in our house, and my wife wakes me up, and she's like, "Psst, Doug, wake up." I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "No, Doug, wake up. Somebody's in our house." And I'm like, "What?" And you know how it is when you wake up, you're like, "Is this a dream or what's going on here?" And she's like, "Doug, wake up." She's like, "I heard the door open, and I saw a flashlight come into our bedroom from outside." And so at this point, I'm like, "What? What are you talking about? What's going on? What have you been smoking tonight, woman?" I'm like, "What's happening?" So I finally kind of come to my senses and realize that she's serious. Like, she's very confident that someone is in our house. So I'm kind of like waking up and like, oh, what's going on? So I get out of bed and I creep over to, I'm like, are you serious? Are you sure? She's like, yes, I'm sure. So I creep up to our bedroom door, which kind of leads out to the hallway. And I just like poking my head around just to see if somebody's going to hit me from behind the door, And I'm just like, I'm standing there to kind of see if I hear anybody moving or if I hear any noise at all. And I'm just like, my heart is racing. Have you guys ever experienced anything like this before? Okay, so my heart is like racing, and I'm like, oh, what do I do? What do I do? So I run back and I go grab my phone and I grab it and I turn it on, and all of a sudden I'm thinking like, I'm gonna start clearing the house, okay? And so I'm thinking, Doug, you've watched enough TV cop shows. You got this, you can do this. So I start clearing the room, and I'm in my skivvies, okay? I'm just telling you. And I was just out in my skivvies, and as I start clearing the room, I didn't care whether the burglar, got a hold of me. You know what I was worried about? Is whether the burglar would see me in my underwear. Okay, that's the only thing at this point I'm worried about. And so I'm like clearing the room, and I'm freaking out, and I'm going behind the doors, and I'm like, got my ninjas going, and I'm ready. And so I go upstairs. And I start clearing the house, and all upstairs is in the bonus room, and there's this closet there, so it was like really freaky. And as I go right to look in the closet, all of a sudden I hear this knock, 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 and I'm like, oh, so somebody was at the front door. And so I run down the door. In the meantime, my wife had called the police. Okay, so then I walk to the door, and I'm like, whoa, and I saw it was the police, so I run back into my bedroom to throw some shorts on because I was in my underwear, and then I go back to the door, and the cops are like, hey, sir, you called? What's going on here? And I'm like, yeah, my wife thinks she heard something, and it's kind of, I don't know what's going on. He's like, well, I'll go around the house, and I'll take the flashlight, and I'll check and see what's going on. So he does this, and I'm just kind of staying there. My heart's still racing because I don't know if somebody's in my house still or not. And so he begins to go around the house, and then he comes back, and he says, sir, I checked all the doors. They're locked. I looked at the grass, and there's no grass laying down, so it doesn't look like anybody's walked on the side or the back or the front of the house. And there's no footprints on the concrete of the patio, and there's dew on the ground. So my footprints were there, and those were the only ones. And when he said that, all of a sudden my heart rate started to go down. And I was like, okay, I feel bad now. So I'm like, sir, I'm sorry. So sorry about this. Thank you so much for coming out here. You know how women are. And I was like, wink, wink, wink. And they took off. And after he said, I'm confident that no one is here, all of a sudden it just changed everything for me. Why? Because I believed in that officer, what he said, what he did, and who he was. And because of that, I had confidence that everything was going to be okay. And this is exactly what God is doing here now for Moses. As we continue on, we look at verse 6, and we see what God says. He says to Moses, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses is like, oh no. And he hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Not because he was scared of God, but he had this reverential fear of like who this really was. And he realized, and when God said that he was the God of Isaac and Abraham and Jacob, all of a sudden it clicked into Moses' head because he knew the story. That at one point God made a covenant. He made a promise with these guys saying that he was going to bless them and he was going to protect them. And then all of a sudden Moses begins to have this confidence in who he was speaking to. It was his God. If we're honest, and I think we need to be, we can look back and we can look at all the things that have taken place in our life. And there are times and moments where we know that God has been there for us. He's done some great things. And maybe you're here and you say, I haven't experienced that. I promise you that God has had his care and his loving arms wrapped around you this whole time. And if you've experienced the amazing gift of salvation, that alone should give us confidence in who God is and what he has done. So that's what we need to do. We look back at the past. It gives us confidence. Realize that God is with us in the present. It gives us confidence to step out in the future. That's the second thought. Here's the third thing that we learned this morning in this story of Moses is this. God doesn't call us because of our ability. He calls us for our availability. Let me say that again. Some of us need to hear this. God doesn't call us because of our ability. He calls us for our availability. And as we read this next section, this is what I want you to do. I want you just for a moment to pretend that you are Moses. Put your shoes in Moses' shoes here and just try to figure out what he's feeling and what it's like. And this is what I want you to do for a second. Turn to the person next to you and just say this. Hi, I'm Moses. Nice to meet you, okay? Just do that real quick. Say, I came up with the 10 Commandments. I did the whole Red Sea thing. Okay, good. Now, you're feeling that. You guys feeling Moses? You are Moses here? Let's look at the conversation between God and Moses. Verse 7, God says, I've indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. He says, I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. I love it because God was concerned about their suffering. He's also concerned with our suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Amorites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites and all the other ites. Okay, and by the way, God is referring here to the promised land. Now I want you to kind of think about this for a second. God comes here and he gives Moses his plan. He says, I'm going to come and I'm going to free my people. Can you imagine what Moses is thinking at this time? He's probably thinking like, God, that's a great plan. Good idea. You're so smart, God. Thank you for sharing your plan with me. And then look what happens in verse 10. God says, wait a minute. So now, go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So for a moment, you're pretending that you're Moses. What would you be feeling right now in this moment? God has just asked you to go do something that you have no clue about, something you're not prepared for, to free an entire nation from slavery. God has just asked you to do this massive thing. Now, if it was me, I kind of would have been like, God, are you sure? A little nervous laughter. I'd be looking around me and see if there was anybody else that God was talking to. Is there a hidden camera, God? Like, God, you're not talking to me. Maybe you called the wrong bush, God. And God's like, no, I'm talking to you, Moses. And God knew when he said this, he knew exactly the ability of Moses. But he was calling Moses beyond his capacity, beyond what Moses could ever do by himself. And Moses knew this as well because he goes on in verse 11. In verse 11, Moses says to God, he realizes what God is asking him. He says, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Who am I, God? What are you talking about? This is crazy. This is foolish talk. I can't do this. And after something like this, after I would say something like that to God if I were Moses, I would expect a little bit of a pep talk, from God. Like, Moses, you got this, man. You got it. I really understand you. You are gifted. You are made for this. Moses, you can handle this. That's what I would want from God, but that's not what he did. He didn't do that. And here's where the promise comes in that I want you to grasp on today. The promise is simply this. God comes back to Moses in verse 12 and says this, I will be with you. I will be with you, Moses. I will be with you. I think when God asks us to do something, we can go to one extreme or the other. We can think that we can't do it, or we can kind of go to the other extreme and say, God, you know what? I'm glad you asked me because, man, I got this, man. God, what would you do without me? Lord, I am here for you, man. I'm going to take care of this for you. And whenever I think of this or whenever I have this kind of mindset, God is pretty quick to remind me like, hey, Doug, you know that I spoke the whole Pacific Ocean into existence, right? I created all of the mountains. I created all of the animals. I even created In-N-Out Burger. Okay, I've got it all under control. I don't need you. But God says, I want you. I want you. And I want you to experience my grace and my love as we work together, as I empower you to do what I've called you to do. This was a big task. This was huge. This was something that Moses could not do. Moses is like, God, I cannot do this. And God's like, you're right, Moses. You can't. You can't do this. But I can. I can. And I'm going to use you, Moses, to bring my people out of slavery, out of bondage, out of hurt and pain, and give them freedom to the promised land. As I read this week, I believe that God is asking us the same thing, church. As we look into this valley and we talk about this initiative, which we'll talk about in a little bit, it is big, it is massive. And when I look at it, I'm like, oh God, can we do this? And God is saying, look, Doug, just as Moses was called to free the Israelites from slavery, I'm calling Stone Hill Church out to go into the Treasure Valley where people are hurting, people are in bondage, people are in pain, and I'm going to use you to give them my hope and to give them my life. Sometimes we can look at that and think, man, there's no way, God. But here's what I want us to get, church. God is looking for ordinary people who will trust in an extraordinary God. God is looking for ordinary people like you and me, people that don't have it all figured out, people that have messy lives. We are not perfect, but he's looking for us to trust in an extraordinary God, and he's calling us out as a church. We have a video we want to show today. It's a video of a man named Donnie and his family, and he's kind of telling us about his story and how he came to Christ and how God used a man. Something maybe you wouldn't think very big, but God used a conversation and a relationship to bring him closer to Christ. I want you to hear the heart in this, and I want you to hear really the heart of this is really what I want for our church, Stone Hill Church. So check out this video.
I didn't grow up in the church. Church was kind of something that my parents talked about a little bit, but we never went to church. Right out of high school, having a kid, that was tough. Me and his mom weren't together. I was only single for a couple weeks after that, and I met a wife of mine. That ended in a divorce, and I had moved to California to just kind of figure out who I wanted to be. Right before I had left, I had met a girl, and we started to talk. 2 years later, I had moved home to start a relationship with her. I did not know this at the time, but God just was working. I got custody of my son when I had moved back, which was a big deal to me. I had started a new job at Commercial Tire and was successful there. They had asked me to take a big move when things were just getting settled here to Kennewick, Washington. Angelina didn't move with me right away. She stayed here to finish her job and to sell our house. So I was there for a couple months by myself with the kids. And I think that's where God got me vulnerable. I had a guy come into my store, and he got my business card and had my cell phone number on it. About a week or two later, I get a text from this guy, and he asked me if I wanted to go to coffee with him. And I'm like, this is weird. This guy wants me to go to coffee with him, but I didn't know anybody. And so I said, he was a really nice guy when he came in. I said, sure, let's go to coffee. We go to coffee, and he started telling me a story that I couldn't process at the time. He got so deep with me and real with me. But as the story went on, I realized that what this guy had, I wanted. He had so much passion in his heart, and he was free, and I wanted that, and it was God. So we had went to church the next Sunday, and God was so faithful in revealing himself to us. A month and a half, 2 months later, we had planned a marriage. We knew we were living in sin, stopped our physical relationships, and just worked on who we needed to be. And we got married at a church service. 2 weeks after we got married, our family got baptized for the first time. I had felt that my success in life wasn't to just be a great tire salesman or a good businessman or how big my house was, what kind of cars I drove. but that the gospel was the only thing that really mattered. It was just the use of a guy being obedient to where God had called him and being a disciple maker. Fast forward a couple months, we were plugged in, things were awesome. God just started shutting doors down to Washington. We just kind of felt like we were being led back here. And so we came back here, and it was tough. We church shopped for a long time, tried to find community. That was a journey where I think God was growing each of us individually. We had landed at Stonehill about 6 months ago. We went there the week after Mother's Day and just got plugged in, and it's been so on point with the gospel and so on point with the mission that I believe to be the true mission of what we need to do in life, is be disciple makers, not spiritual consumers, but spiritual doers. We're just so blessed to partner with Stonehill and to be the church.
I believe that God has called Donnie and his family here for a specific reason. He moved here for a job, but I believe that God is moving, and just hearing his story and talking to him about what God, he sees God for, has a plan for him in his future. And I get excited about it, talking to him. I believe there's a purpose. And just as God was in the story of Donnie, he's in your story, and he's in the story of people that are in this community that we get to share the hope with. Maybe you've just moved recently from California or Oregon or who knows where. Or maybe you've been here for a while and you're just kind of living here in this community and you're saying, what is my purpose, God? Why am I here? And God has kind of put these bushes in front of you to let you know, but you're looking for something big and massive, and maybe it's right there in front of us. And here's what I know, is that God has you at Stonehill Church for a reason. I believe it. For you to share your faith with the people you come in contact, because it's not just, we're not the church here on Sunday mornings, we're the church as we go out and we share the love of God to everyone we come in contact with. This isn't just a social club. This is a place where people can come and hear the good news of Jesus and then go out and spread the good news of Jesus to everyone they come in contact with. But we do have to gather together. We do have to have a space for permanency. We have to have permanency so that people can be disciples, so kids can come together and be deepened in their faith, a place where we can meet during the week to deepen our faith in Jesus Christ. We have to have a space of permanency so we can continue to be the light to this community, a place where people can see us like a light on a hill, whether we're on a hill or not, where people will see the love of Jesus through us. And God is calling each one of us to step out of our comfort zone, to do something that's way bigger than ourselves, and not forget that God is calling us to reach people for Him. And that's what we're about, Stonehill. That's what we're about. You see, to see a miracle, God has called us to actually be part of the miracle. Just like Moses, as he saw the Red Sea part, he didn't just see it, he was part of it. And God used him in a mighty way. And yes, God has already done some miracles at Stonehill Church, but I believe he's calling all of us to be part of what he has for us next. And it's going to be something amazing. Think about your own personal life for a second. You might be the answer to someone's dilemma. Your family member, your coworkers, your children, your family. God might be asking you to step up, to be a miracle in someone else's life. You say, I can't do that. Like, I'm waiting for Billy Graham to come in. I'm waiting for our pastor of Stonehill Church to take care of it. But God is saying, no. I've called you. I've called you to be that miracle in someone else's life. That's what God has called us, church. And here's the promise. He says he will be with you. He will be with you as an individual. He will be with us as a church. He has got our back. Do you hear that? God has got our back. So no matter how big it is, we can step out in confidence and in faith. And so here's our challenge as we end this morning. What is our promise back to God going to be? Here's what I think it should be. God, I've seen you in the past. I've seen your miracles. I look throughout the Word of God, and I believe it's true. And I've seen that you've done amazing things, but I've also seen you do amazing things here at Stonehill. I've seen you do amazing things in my own life. God, you've given me the gift of salvation. That alone is amazing. And because of all of that, I now will have the faith to step out in obedience to what you have called me to do. And church, that's what God is calling us to do as a corporate body as well. To step out, even when it's big, because he will always be with us. That's his promise. Let's pray together. God, we are so thankful for all you've done. And God, just as you were there for Moses, God, we know we can study the rest of the Bible. We can look through Paul and all the apostles and John and Mark and Peter, and we can see, God, how their life it was hard at times. God, you'd called them to do some big things that were difficult, but you were always with them. You were always with them. And it didn't always work out like they probably imagined, but God, your perfect plan was always done. So God, I pray for that for our church. We don't know what's next, God. We don't want to manufacture anything. We don't want to manipulate anything. God, we just want to hear from you, whatever that is, that you would give us guidance, you give us direction. And even as we step out in this initiative, God, you're calling us to step out as a church and as individuals, God, that we would never get in front of you, that we would always be right with you or right behind you, God, that you would lead the way, we would follow after you. God, I pray for this church, that we would always seek after you. Pray that we would never get in your way. You would continue to give us direction. God, we love you and thank you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen, amen. It's an exciting time to be a part of the church, isn't it? God's doing some big things here. It's crazy to see, and as we've talked more about this Promises Initiative and what this looks like, we really wanted to make sure that what we're communicating is what God wants us to communicate, because what we don't want you to hear as we talk about the Promises Initiative and we talk about what God's going to be doing with us as Stonehill in the future is that it's just about money. It's just about a building. Because if that's what you would hear, then we would be like totally missing what we believe God's doing here. What we believe God's doing is that he is working in and through us, the whole of us, our spirituality, our comfort zones, and taking us to places that are places we've never been before. And that's why, though yes, it is about raising funds, and eventually you're going to hear more and more. That's why the Vision Nights are going to be so important when it comes to what we want to do, what we want to accomplish, and more than what we want to accomplish, what we believe God's calling us to accomplish in and through this church, in and through us as individuals, but collectively as a whole. And so, it's more than just about money. It's about our spirituality. It's about who we are, where God's taking us individually. And so we created these amazing devotionals that each of you are going to get on your way out. And so it's not just about the prayer bracelets, which is going to be amazing to remind you to pray for all sorts of different things, but also these devotionals are going to be an opportunity for you to dig into the promises of God, to see how throughout history, throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, how God has made promises. And these promises, though some of them aren't necessarily for us, these tell of who God is, his character, who he is. And so we could look at these promises and see that God is a loving God, that God is a faithful God, that God is there in times of sorrow, that God is there in hard times, that God is there in good times, that God, just like he promised to Moses, that we can hold strong to the fact that God will be with us in what we do, because we believe God's taken us into some big places. So all of you are going to get this. It's a 28-day devotional digging into the promises of God. But we've been talking a lot about the whole Promises Initiative, so we wanted to break it down this way, really, really clear of what exactly we're looking to do, what exactly we're looking to do with God. So here's the why. That the reason we want a permanent facility is because we want to continue moving forward with God. That God is moving fast. God is doing some huge things here at Stonehill, just in our growth alone. And it's not all about statistics. It's not all about numbers. But the fact is, this morning, right now, we have 870 people that have come to church this weekend. That's awesome. In 1 year, what God has done is unlike anywhere in the nation. This doesn't happen. This is not a normal thing of what God's doing here at Stonehill. We don't say that braggingly. We say that going, dang, God, what are you up to? What are you doing here? God, you must be doing something big. And so because of that, we want to stay right in step with God. We don't want to run ahead. We don't want to fall behind. We want to stay right where God's at, and we believe what's next for us is that permanent location that's going to give us security, because the reality is we have a great relationship with Victory Middle School. We have a great relationship with the principals and the teachers, and we invest, and it's awesome, but this is not a long-term plan. This can't be a long-term plan. And so we need security and location, but more than anything, we want to put a stake in the ground in this community to say, hey, community, we love you, we're here for you, and we are going to stay. We're going to continue investing in you no matter what happens, and that is why we want this permanency. That is why we want a building. That is why we want land. That is why we want to be here in South Meridian doing major things for God. But it doesn't just happen. There has to be a stepping out. There has to be a movement of faith. So the what? What are we looking for? Well, we're looking for 5 to 10 acres of land. That's the first thing we're looking for. 5 to 10 acres of land that we can build on. And if there is an existing building that is already there and we can renovate, then that would be amazing too. But the reality is we have done a ton, and when I say a ton of research. We've been to buildings, we've looked, we've walked around, we've asked, we've sought, and there's nothing open in the area that we want to be in. There's absolutely nothing open right now. Now, can God open some things up? Absolutely. And if he does, we are going to be on like white on rice, like unless it's brown rice. But we are going to be on it, all right? We have the people in the place. There are a lot of people helping us. We've asked people that are smarter than us to be a part of this because we know that we don't know everything. And so we have people that are looking and seeking and things like that. But right now, more specifically, 5 to 10 acres in this boundary area, from Cloverdale to 10 Mile and the freeway to Amity. If we can find somewhere there, that really is where we believe God's calling us. Now, we can extend those boundaries if we can't find anything, but that's where we want to be because it's about location, location, location. And we have done the research. It is $1.5 million, about on average, maybe a little bit less, maybe even a little bit more, depending on where we need to be for 5 to 10 acres. But we know that God's going to do some big things. Do you know what a God goal is? A God goal is when you set something that's just a little bit beyond yourself, so that when you attain that goal, you can't go, wow, look at all that I've done. And you attain that goal and you go, God, you are big. God, you are amazing. I could not have done this on ourselves. That is what that $1.5 million is for us. When we sit down and we look at it from a budgetary standpoint, we go, I don't know if we can do this. And that's where that faith steps in, because I believe God will do it with all my heart, and we'll look back and we won't toot our own horn. We'll go, God, you are big. God, it was because you that we did this. We are relying on him. And so here's the how. The Promises Initiative. We need every single person to begin doing the heart work, looking in and saying, okay, what matters to me? What matters to me? And just like Doug talked about, when Moses, he sat back and God's calling him out and say, hey, I want you to do something big. Moses, there's all sorts of excuses he could use. There's all sorts of things that he could look back and go, I'm not sure if I have what it takes. But he stepped out in faith and made a difference far beyond himself. And that's what we're asking you to do. That over the next few weeks, we're going to hear more and more about these promises, more and more about how God shows up, more and more about the story of the Israelites. And it's going to be a story a little bit like ours because it's a little bit scary. Next week, we're going to talk about the whole idea of the wanderer, not getting comfortable in this complacency, in this place that we could just kind of like stay because this is comfortable, the school's fine, everything's working out here. But the reality is we believe God's calling us to something big and something new. But on November 5th, we're going to ask for commitments. That you would commit with us to doing something that I can't do on my own, Doug can't do on his own, the elder board we can't do, staff, we can't do on our own. This is collective. This is us together. We will either fail together or we will see God move like we've never seen God move before. But it's going to be with God. I can't wait to see what God does. And it's not just us here with the adults. We want the kids to feel involved too. And so we went into the classrooms today to talk to the kids about their involvement, not because we want to take money from the kids. All right? Don't like, make sure you hear our heart. It's about inclusion. It's about, I have a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old, and I want them to know that they get to make a difference too. And that's why we went to your kids and we said, hey, we want you to be a part of the church too, what God's doing here. And so they received these little cute piggy banks, and they could go home, and on November 5th, they're going to bring them back and fill up. And I want the kids to step back and go, wow. In the same way that we're going to step back and go, God, you're amazing. I can't wait to see what God will do. Can we worship together? Would you stand? Let's worship a little more together.